Good morning for those of you who are chiming in from the United States, and good evening for those of you who are joining us from Japan and the rest of the Asia. Welcome to Stimson Center Japan Program's annual event, Japan Voices from Japan National Security Speaker Series. We have just opened up the our Zoom link, Zoom room, so we are letting people log on. So we will get started in a few minutes. Give us a couple of more minutes before we get started as we let people into our seminar room. Hmm. それでは1時間ぽっきりそろそろよろしいでしょうか、金原さん。
面白いんですよ。どうぞ。
All right.
待ってないよ。
Okay, so I think people will probably continue to trickle in. So I just got a cue from our audio folks that we can get started. So I think we're going to get started. Again, welcome everyone. Welcome to Stimson Center Japan Program's annual event, Voices from Japan National Security Speaker Series. For the last few years, because of the COVID restriction in terms of international travel, we had to take this on the website, on the web world, and had to reimagine this a little bit. And even when we are planning this year's event, mainly Japan's re-entry restriction kept evolving, and it was just very unpredictable. So we decided to go for the web-based events again this year. And I am especially honored to welcome Honorable Nobukatsu Kanehara, who's a professor currently at the Dosha University, but the former Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary and Deputy Director General at the National Security Secretariat of Japan, in the government of Japan. Honorable Kanehara has a long distinguished career as a professional diplomat before he retired after serving quite many years as the Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary for National Security and Foreign Policy in the government of Japan. And in that role, he had played a behind the scene, but very critical role in shaping the 2013 National Security Strategy of Japan, which was the first ever strategic document that the government of Japan came out, and which is currently under revision. And we are waiting for the security strategy at any day now. So I am especially delighted that Kanehara-san decided to join us this evening, and especially thankful that he agreed to stay up a little bit way before his bedtime in his Japan time. So welcome, Kanehara-san. Thank you for joining us. I would like to start off the session by asking you a couple of opening questions, and then we'll move right into a Q&A so that we can entertain as many questions as possible. So Kanehara-san, you did have a very big role in shaping the contour of the 2013 National Security Strategy of Japan. Compared to that time, it's been almost 10 years. What has changed from when you were forming that document with your colleagues and now?
I mean, many things change. Thank you for having me. Anyway, let me explain what I did. 2013 with Takamizawa-san, we asked Prime Minister to write the very first national security strategy in the post-war time. And I have two things in mind. One is our own thinking has changed. In 1976, the first defense guideline for national defense, that's budget paper, was written by Prime Minister Miki. And he presented a very clear logic. He said Japan cannot create a power vacuum in Asia that would destabilize the region. So the bare minimum of the military capabilities necessary for Japan. It is astonishing here because we had a very big Far East Red Army of Soviet Union, and bare minimum is nothing. so what is this? So this was but long time. This logic just blinded Japanese strategic thinking. I want to break it, and we did. So we have to make it clear that we're in alliance with the Americans and we're in the West. And who are the challengers? We want to engage them. But if they try to use their force, we have to stop them. How to do that? And we need this national strategy for Japan, because during the Cold War, it was very clear. So it's not necessary to write a national security strategy. Russia was there, NATO was there, Japan-US alliance, Korea-US alliance, and Philippine-US alliance, and the Australia-US alliance. The networks are there, and we were successful in maintaining peace and stability during the Cold War. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. Terrorism was rampant, and North Korea developed nuclear weapons. 2012, when Abe-san took power, China has just to rise. And at that time, Chinese economic size was Japan's size. We are seeing that, China's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. This was the feeling of 2012. But even at that time, China was very assertive already. China was bullying Japan over the Senkaku Islands, bullying Filipinos over Scarborough Reef. Scarborough was taken by China. We are pushing it back. But we said, wow, China is now bullying the allies of the US in Asia. That was the feeling of 2012. And meantime, so we thought the next maybe challenge is Chinese rise. How to keep the stability in the region, in particular, how to maintain the status quo of the Strait, Taiwan Strait, will become our possible big agenda for us. That was the thinking of 2012 and 2013. And then we wrote the national security strategy. Of course, we established the National Security Council for the first time after the war. And the Security Council's first job is to write the national security strategy. So we did. And in comparison with that time, what is different today is simple size of China. 2013, China was our size. Today, China is 3 times bigger than us. And Chinese military budget is 5 times bigger than Japan's. Japan's military budget will be doubled in coming 5 years. This is the statement of Kishida-san today. Amazing, isn't it? It's great. But even today, Japan's military budget is largely the size of UK, France, or Germany. That means the military budget combines UK, France, Germany, and Japan is still smaller than today's Chinese military budget. And they don't incorporate the budget for R&D, research and developments. It's all combined, the military sector, academic sector, and the industrial sector. So I don't think they have a true, purely military budget for R&D, but must be huge. So the Chinese challenge is now real. And unfortunately, Xi Jinping took power and he monopolized the power, and he kicked out all the communist youth group, the elite people, and he picked up the local vassals. And all the yes men surrounding him, he might make a big mistake like Putin. This is the very bad part of very long dictatorship. Putin served 20 years, and Xi Jinping could serve 20 years, and he might make a big mistake. So we have to be prepared now. And this is a very different war. Korean War, we have South Koreans are very strong, 600,000 fourth army, and the same size military budget as Japan. And they can stop North Korean invasion. So Japan should be worried about the foreign missiles with missile defense. Taiwan is very different. Chinese military power is huge, and Japan will be exposed to their conventional and possibly nuclear attack together with Taiwan. And this is a very different, very difficult war. How to deter this Chinese aggression, we have to think of various things: economy, and the climate change, and the total networking of the Western nations, and then finally how to deter China in the theater militarily with a big ground strategy. Abe-san was working on that for free and open Indo-Pacific, cooperation with NATO, cooperation with the EU, and cooperation with ASEAN nations partially, and the Australia and India are very important. And how to engage Korea is very difficult, but we have to do it. And on this diplomatic front, we have to work hard, and we have to expand our own military capabilities. Diplomatic strategy was functioning well since Abe-san, but what is lacking very much in Japan is its own military capabilities. We cannot deter China. We have said that this war is very different from Korean War. American carrier battle groups will be very far. They could help us from very far. American Marines and Army and Air Forces will be in Japan together with the self-defense forces. Taiwanese Army would be working, but would be totally exposed to China. And this is a very different war. And we have to cope with the new domains like cyber, space, and electromagnetic. We have technology, but it's not yet weaponized in Japan. We're very backward. We have to work on that. So these things are in mind. I believe that my colleagues are working hard for implementing these things. One thing, today, Kishida-san says Japan should spend 43 trillion yen in coming 5 years. It means doubling the defense budget. So it's finally coming in. So we have to be serious about writing new national defense strategy and the guidelines for a national defense budget, and the midterm defense programs. Next one will be a very heavy one, a big leap in Japan's military history.
Thank you, Kanehara-san. So you touched upon so many issues that we often read in the media. There are lots of speculation going on, especially on the, as you rightly pointed out, the National Defense Program guidelines and a couple of the specific defense capability that the Japan may or may not acquire, start to acquire in those programs moving forward. So if you do have a crystal ball, in the national security, revised national security strategies that are coming up and to be released by the end of this month, what are the key themes that you would see or you would like to see, given the strategic environment's change that you had discussed with us right now?
Yeah, what is now being written in Japanese papers, first of all, is the offensive weapons. It's in the intermediates. It's a conventional warheads and intermediate missiles. The China, Russia, and the North Korea have them, and they have nuclear weapons. And Taiwanese and Koreans have the conventional intermediate missiles, 2,000, 3,000. We had only 200 kilometers missiles. I was very angry when I was active in the government. I started to argue, we need that. And then Abe-san said, just buy them, and JASMA now coming in. But it's not enough at all. And finally, government will decide to expand our offensive capabilities, arsenal of offensive capabilities. It's necessary because we cannot fight. Americans and Russians were binding each other by INF treaty. Now it's abolished by Mr. Trump. But China has a huge number of weapons. 1,600 warheads were targeted against us. And Americans has 0, and Japan has 0. This is a big problem. Now we have to fill the gap of this intermediate missile gap with China, so that we should be ready to deter China at any stage. This is the first thing to do. And I think the Komeito and the governments, and Komeito and LDP have agreed. Now the government must persuade other parties to get the budget through for that. And apart from that, we have to rehabilitate the war fighting capabilities of SDF. During the Cold War time, the real strategy was until Americans come back to the shore of Japan, we cannot lose Hokkaido. If we lose Hokkaido, the Soviet army will trump Tokyo, and then whole Japan will surrender. And that was a nightmare. So before Hokkaido falls, Americans should come back. So our maritime self-defense forces are always operating with the 7th Fleet to secure sea routes for American Marines and American Army coming back from Seattle and Hawaii. In the meantime, our air and ground forces must be fighting in Hokkaido for several months. The Americans will come and take over the battle. Okay, this was somehow the strategy of Cold War time, and we made our self-defense forces to that effect. So they are ready to fight for several months, and they say after that Americans will come. they have no bullets, they have no missiles, and this is very bad. Next war in Taiwan is a very different war, and there's no guarantee that America will take over after 3 months. Maybe we should be obliged to fight together next to the Americans and Taiwanese, and they'll say 2 years, or we have absolutely not enough bullets and missiles. 1, 2, hardening of our bases are very poor. We hardened the bases in Hokkaido, but never thought of fighting a war with China over Taiwan. And near Taiwan, our bases are in the south are very weak. And Army are now opening new bases in Okinawan area, Yonaguni, Miyako, Ishigaki, and Amami. These are new bases, and we have to harden these bases. The command communications center must be underground, and our best planes, F-35 or F-2 or F-15 updated, must be covered, right? And these things must be done seriously, and it's not yet done. We never thought of fighting a war in the south. Now there's a big change. We have to be prepared for that, and then we need more parts. We don't have enough parts. Our planes don't fly because of lack of parts, and we lack the number of doctors. Next to war, where we need maybe we see the 10,000 boys hands and feet cut off, even lose their lives. We need a lot of doctors and nurses who don't have the drugs, and these things are absolutely necessary. And I have to say, the treatments of our soldiers are not very good in comparison with the policemen, firemen, but they fight at the cost of their lives in a war. And if we can't take care of them fully, nobody will stay in self-defense forces. So there are a lot of things to be done, a lot of things.
Thank
and
you.
I have to add, new domains like cyber. Space is somehow going on. Cyber is now, it's a government failure, but governments bind the hands of our hackers in the government, white hackers. Government say our white hackers do not enter the other's computer. Stupid, isn't it? They should quit suicide, but our legal authorities just saying to our soldiers, hackers, white hackers, don't enter the other's computer, so they can't fight. This must be corrected, and then we have to expand our cyber army. We have already in 2018 in the new defense guideline and said we should expand our cyber army. And this is a failure. Now we thought it's 5,000 or 10,000. Now we have only 500. This is not enough. This is a fake. And Marines, we have in 2013, the Prime Minister Abe ordered to create Marine. Now 10 years later, they have now 3,000. It's a brigade side. They are totally weaponized. They are operational. But the hacker pirates, the cyber, I have said we are very back. We are not yet at the start line. So we have to do something here. This is a very heavy thing. We are worse than Ukraine 2014.
that is a shocking comparison that you ended right there. Moving directly into the Q&A, because there are already a couple. First one comes from your old friend, you know this guy, Paul Giera.
Oh, hi.
He said, he says, here's his question. Dear Kanehara-san, under the circumstances that you described, it seems that nuclear armament is an obvious option for Japan, or can be. There has been some mention of shared U.S.-Japan nuclear weapon in Japan along the NATO model. Are you and the later political strategic and the larger political strategic establishment in Japan are prepared to discuss this option?
No.
Oh, that was quick.
I started this debate. I was invited by the Ivo Dardar in the Chicago Council, together with the other distinguished members. We just published the reports. There I said the Asian nations should consider the nuclear sharing now, because nuclear umbrella vis-a-vis China. China is not too big. Is this okay? The American nuclear umbrella. Maybe like Europeans, we should enhance more the credibility of American nuclear umbrella. Just started this, and we made a book with Takamizawa-san, the best-selling book. Let's talk about nuclear weapons honestly. This is the title. This became a bestseller. But finally, Abe-san, late Abe-san, he started to say, "Now Japan should consider, not do, consider. Or Japan should start discussions about nuclear sharing vis-a-vis rising China." But Abe-san died. Kishida-san is born in Hiroshima. Okay. And it's not yet time, maybe not time for him to do this, because he is now fighting for doubling the military budget. And this is the most important thing for him. And this is not easy one. He might be obliged to raise tax. Thus, that would invite backlash from the people. And now this is the most important thing to do for him. And he has Hiroshima summit next year. So politically, now in particular after Abe-san's death, this nuclear debate is now being marginalized. But it's very vividly discussed on TV. It's amazing, isn't it? Nobody discussed nuclear sharing or introduction of American ground-based nuclear weapons. Nobody was saying that. Now, these days, in every TV show, people are now casually talking about nuclear weapons. I think it's a good thing. And NATO type nuclear sharing is, I think it's not very efficient in Japan. B-61, right? The free falling missiles 100. We don't have Chinese tanks coming in a massive way, like Russian tanks in Berlin. On the contrary, their ships are huge. Now they have 350 destroyers, 1,600 fourth, fifth fighters, and these things are true problems for us. And in that case, what's the role of nuclear weapons for Japan? I think this is the second strike. If China attacks some remote bases of self-defense forces with tactical nukes, Americans, I believe, will never use back the nuclear weapons. So the China could do that. But if it could show that the Americans have this, intermediate range missiles, not only to protect their own carriers, but also to defend the regional allies, and China might think that the Americans will shoot back if they use tactical nukes, small ones. And I think that is better to make the escalation ladder more dense, and this will create some more tension, and this will create more stability. And if we introduce, I don't know, Koreans and Taiwanese might ask Americans to introduce their ground-based nuclear missiles. I think in Japan, we're islanders, and I think we are going to ask Americans to reinvent nuclear tomahawk, sea-based ones, and just take it on your attack submarines, and sometimes come to Yokosuka or come to Sasebo. And maybe if Prime Minister changes, he might say, Japan wishes to have a nuclear propulsion submarines like Australians. And in that case, Japan could incorporate American crew who are coming together with nuclear weapons on their board. But I think it's not yet at all on the agenda for Kishida-san.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kanehara-san. So, and that along the same line, there is since the beginning of last month, there has been some news headline that are made about the U.S. Air Force withdrawing their F-15 squadron from Kadena in Okinawa, and attracting the criticism that it can be sending a wrong strategic message to China. How do you see their decision? I just have to assume that there must have been the pre-consultation on this with the Japan, either with the Defense Ministry or the Self-Defense Forces troops on the ground. How do you see their decision?
Well, as I said, Taiwan War is a very different fall from Korean War. China is superior in air forces, in the surface forces, and we will be pushed back. And they have a lot of missiles, the 21-26, and they are determined to secure their H-280 strategy. That means American carrier groups cannot approach. If American carrier groups cannot approach, their fighters will come, bombers, and stay somehow there, and they go back. So the Taiwanese forces, Japanese forces, American forces in Japan are exposed to Chinese attack, maybe with partial air superiority, partial sea superiority, and this is the case. So I think it's natural that the Americans will take back their very expensive F-15 and come on rotational basis. But if you put the planes there in Kadena, if Xi Jinping decides one day, let's attack them, 15 minutes, it's all over. So they come on rotational basis. That's fine, because we have to understand that the next war in Taiwan, Japan is in a frontal stage, not in a rear position. Japan is in a frontal position like Taiwanese, and the damage will be much bigger than in Korean War. So Americans are taking caution, so we have to be prepared for that too. The reason that's maybe the reason why we are now introducing a number of F-35B, because even when the runway are bombarded, they can land anywhere. So we have to think of more flexible fighting, and regular fighting will not be in our advantage.
Thank you. Again, sticking to this thing, there's another question coming in on this one was the U.S. Air Force's decision, but then this one is specifically focused on the potential capability that the JMSDF might consider to have. So could you give your thoughts on whether you think the Maritime Self-Defense Force will move ahead with the plan to acquire a 20,000-ton ballistic missile defense capable destroyers? There were reports going around that plant tonnage had been cut down to around 8,200 tonnage or so, and there has been speculation that ultimately more Maya-class vessels will be built, or that Japan may finally acquire Aegis Ashore instead. So which of these ballistic missile defense options seem most likely or makes most sense to you?
Well, I think if Kono-san had not cancelled that land-based Aegis Ashore, next year, the year after next year, that could be operational. And it would enhance the integration of our army, integrated air defense, and it could be used as launching pads for future intermediate missiles in the future. But Kono-san just scrapped it without deep thinking, and he had no alternatives. He just left the ministry, and then the big debate started what to do. And I believe that now the option that Ministry of Defense has taken is to make a big ship with a very good radar and some goods, shooting anti-ballistic missiles. I think that's the plan. And I don't know what will come out in the end, but I think that is the alternative plan. That's the defense ministry is pursuing.
Thank you. So we've been for this last 10, 15 minutes or so, we really focused on the real contingency over Taiwan. But I think in a sense, more importantly, day-to-day interface that Japan has been dealing with China really is putting on the shoulder of the Coast Guard. So there is one question that's coming in about that, which is, what do you expect the role of Japan Coast Guard to counter China's gray zone tactics in East China Sea for the next decade? Under gray zone situation, the role of maritime law enforcement, like Coast Guard, would be much greater because they will be the front end of that gray zone tactics. So and then also you mentioned about the defense budget will be increased by double. So, and then we have also seen the speculation that how Japanese government also might consider rolling the budget for the Coast Guard up into the more, larger definition of the national security budget. So how do you feel about the role of the Japan Coast Guard?
Well, Coast Guard was under pressure because the Senkaku Island was the job. Because it's the Kaikei hygiene vessels. Hygiene is Chinese Coast Guard vessel. They started to bully Japan towards the end of 2012. It's just before Abe government stood up. It's Hu Jintao's decision. It's not Xi Jinping, but it's now being accelerated under Xi Jinping. And that time we had 50 boats beyond 1,000 tons, our Coast Guard. They had only 40. But meantime, China became 3 times bigger than us in terms of economy. Of course, their Coast Guard became 3 times bigger than us in number, 130. And Abe-san ordered to expand our Coast Guard. Now have 70. They have 130. And they have very big guns, 76 millimeters. It's a true cannon. It's not for the Coast Guard usually, but they have them. And this is where we are. And China uses these policemen to invade. This is their own tactics. They didn't have a regular army and navy and air force before. So they are very good at guerrilla warfare, and they still do this militia and policemen. They are used in for the purpose of invasion. That's what they are doing in Senkaku. Our response is to expand our Coast Guard fleets and to push them back. And Scarborough was taken because the Filipinos Coast Guard is weak. Our Coast Guard is not weak, so they're pushing them back every day. And this is what's going on. This is strange because for policemen are pushing back the invading policemen. This is stupid, but this is what China does. So we have to react to that. We're very careful to throw in our Navy because China will use this as an excuse. Japan started a war. So we are using the Coast Guards. 2 things. One, China, there's no true distinction between wartime and peacetime. We have very clear distinction. During peacetime, policemen, and even though our Navy is instructed to help Coast Guard, they must act as a policeman. So they cannot shoot easily the people. It must be self-defense. It's a very tight constitutional restriction upon the Navy and Coast Guard and how to cope with the Chinese militia and Chinese hygiene vessels who could be in the military mode. And this is something that we have to think seriously. And second, when the war starts, then our Coast Guard becomes the Coast Guard comes under the control of defense minister. They change his ministers from the transportation minister to the defense minister. So in a true war, how to use these the Coast Guard vessels under control of defense ministers? This is a very different issue too. We can't send in our policemen in the battlefield. This is not a civilized nation, but they can do many things because all Navy ships are going southward, right? So Coast Guard ships could go northward just to fill in the vacuum there for reconnaissance or patrol. They can defend our tankers, civilians. So we have to think of this phase 2, the roles of Japanese Coast Guard. I think I left my government several years ago, so I don't know, but the Abe's government was very serious in making these two forces coordinate each other very seriously. I think to some extent it's going on. There are some extreme opinions. Some Navy guys say you should fight together with me to the Japanese Coast Guard. Japanese Coast Guard says no, it's your own job. We are policemen and firemen, and we're emergency doctors, and we can't replace Navy. And they were shouting against each other in this way, but I believe that now they are talking more concrete operations in contingency now.
I believe so too. I think I've been hearing that their relationship have been more constructive and more functional nowadays. And then you mentioned Philippines. So there is one question that are coming in that realm. I think one of the major legacy of late Prime Minister Abe was his outreach to Japan's potential strategic partners, and that included Southeast Asia. And there's a question for you is whether you see Tokyo having a little bit closer ties with the Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines through more of a formalized treaty. There are some local news in the region that some politicians are willing to entertain such an idea. And then as we know, the Philippine Army will send observers to annual JGSDF and US and JGSDF, the Yamasakura exercise that's happening. I think sometime this maybe that may be already underway. What are your thoughts?
Well, the American Pacific Alliance system is Japan, Korea, and Taiwan in parentheses, and then Philippines and Thailand and Australia. This is American allies in the Pacific, far weaker than NATO. And I have to say, in the beginning, the core alliance in this is Japan. And then South Korea, born like the Republic of China, came from the continents, and Philippines got independence. And then American has the security treaty with each one, but with Japan, our treaty is a special one because it has not only Article 5 for co-defense, Article 6. Article 6 stipulates the regional structure of American defense system. That is, Americans will use Japanese bases and to keep stability and peace in the Far East. And the Far East means only 3 nations. This is a formal interpretation, which Japan's government said many times this in the diet: Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And this, from the beginning, we started in this way. But we say this, we know this, we say this, but Koreans say, what are you talking about? They don't understand that we're supporting them. Taiwan neither. The people in the region believe that Americans will come directly from corners. It is not the case. Japan is the perching tree. Without Japan, Americans cannot fight in the peninsula, in Taiwan, in the Philippines. This is our structure. So it may be time to understand what kind of framework our forces, the ASEAN forces, Koreans, Taiwanese, and Japanese are operating. The most spine-like alliances, Japan, US, and then how to define the roles and the missions of each forces, what are the common threats, how to eliminate these threats in contingency, and what are roles and missions, what would be the commanding line. We have to now think of these kind of things seriously.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Going back to shifting a little bit to to China again. There's a question, as we all seen, China and Russia are looking more and more cozy nowadays. And I wonder if you can give us your thought about how Japan is viewing the China-Russia no limits partnership from a defense perspective, what it could mean for Japan, what it could mean for the United States. How are the combined neighbor patrols like China and Russia that they seem to be doing a lot nowadays around Japan, affecting readiness levels and preparations to deal with the combined threat?
Well, there's no limits in their distrust. They don't.
That was quick.
They don't love each other at all. They are very different. There are three major powers in the continents. That's the India, Russia, and China. We have to pay attention all the time into this inner dynamics among the three. And it is always better to isolate the enemy, only one, take the other two as our friends. And now India is now slowly coming from Russia towards us. It's good. And sorry, but Putin made a big historic mistake, and that's Ukrainian invasion. He can't reverse this course now. Now he's done. And China is now challenging us. So it's natural that we pull India from Russia towards us. And India is somehow happy to be in this way. They can't cut off Russia totally because they need Russians to deter China. But we can pull Indians towards us more because in Russia will become very weak after the war. And then Russia and China. Russia becomes weaker, so they need Chinese. They ask China to buy the discounted oil, and they ask their maybe weapons. China will say no, maybe no. And China and Russia's situation is like this. Okay, Putin fights a war against the Americans. That's good. Okay, please take attention of the Americans. Then I'll be okay. But if Putin is defeated, wow, it's only me, so you should be better. And this is roughly Chinese thinking. China thinks Putin should fight well with the Americans. 1, 2, don't involve me. 3, if you have extra oil, I can buy it. And they are competing with each other, Russians and Chinese. Russia expanded too much under Stalin. And the China still believe that the large part of Far East, that was under Qing dynasty's territory. And in China's part of Manchuria, 100 million Chinese are living there. On the other side of Amur River, Usuri River, there are only 6 million. This is because of border. If there's no border, China will expand there. There are minerals and oil and gas. China is happy to see that. And they are now competing in Kazakhstan. And the Putin is now in trouble. And Kazakhstan is a big nation. Among the 5 Central European nations, Kazakhstan, in terms of population, it's Uzbekistan, but the money, power, Kazakh is big. And Kazakhstan is nationalist. And they just erase their Kirill writings, and they say now we are Kazakhs. And Russians are very angry, in particular northern part of Kazakhstan. For Russians, it's like Japanese Manchuria. We developed this land, it's mine, that's Russia. And China is now sneaking into Kazakhstan. Tokarev is now moving from Russia towards China, seeing the Putin's difficulties in Ukraine. So Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and Totoro in love affair, they are taking advantages of each other. I think that this is not real. We see Chinese vessels and the Russian vessels are going around our islands. Our self-defense forces, they are laughing at it. They are too weak to start a war. That's just showing that we are here. They are just doing the presence operation. It's the threat to Japan? No. And we don't believe that they truly fight against Japan in combined way. We don't believe that.
Thank you. Another question coming in. This is going back to China again. That it's regarding, we talked about this we spent a little bit time on this already, but it's regarding the Chinese Coast Guard capability. So as you know, Chinese Coast Guard is increasing the acquisition of retired old Chinese naval ships, which could mean that there will be a force gap in terms of the tonnage and the size between Chinese and Japanese Coast Guards. So how do you think Japan Coast Guard should cope with this gap? Should they go with the same tactics as Chinese do and then start acquiring JMSDF's old destroyers and just paint them white? Or do you think that they should take a little bit smarter approach?
We are now expanding the Coast Guard fleet. We are now kicking out the old vessels. More than 40 years we use them, so we ask them to retire. We are introducing new bigger vessels, more capable. And we don't do the same thing, paints the warship whites and make it join the Coast Guard. We don't do that. And their guns are huge. It's amazing. 76 millimeters. Have you seen that? The gun's bullet. It's half of me. It's huge.
Wow.
You have to carry it in this way. It's for warfare. It's not for policemen. But this is what they are doing. And we have to enhance capabilities, of course, to some extent. But beyond that, it's the military. We are now preparing a huge Coast Guard fleets. Abe-san ordered from 50, now we are 60, we are 70. It's still expanding because Chinese are expanding. But if you see 100 versus 200 and using 676 millimeter guns everywhere, this is no longer a gray zone. This is a pure black zone, and this is a war. Then it's time to declare war either side. So we are now preparing a big wall, white wall of Coast Guard. China is doing the same. But if this white wall is broken, either one will immediately say this is a war, and the Navy will be involved.
So on that note, you've mentioned in your past, opening remarks about how sometimes this very legalistic approach, like, you mentioned about the some government officials mentioning to white hackers, like, do not getting into other people's computer. But then that's really based on, their legalistic approach to privacy law and, things like that. So Japan can have all the capability that it wants to have or it needs to have to counter China. But really what it comes down to is the decision-making of the leader at that time and whether there is a government, administratively, legally system that could support those timely decision-making. And that is really in a larger context of crisis management. And as we all know, Japan did have this triple disaster back in 2011. Did that experience and the other experience that Japan has gone through, like rapidly growing China and even more unpredictable and aggressive North Korea, does those teach Japanese political leaders some key lessons for crisis management, for better, so that they will be better prepared to defend the country when that time should ever arise? In particular, will domestic politics be better and ready for future foreign crises like Chinese incursions or Taiwan contingencies? Especially with Mr. Abe gone, the LDP cannot be unified, not necessarily under one strong leader. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you touched upon many different points. If you look at the history of Japanese Prime Minister's office, it's just like how White House was strengthened. The Japanese Prime Minister's office, a big shock was Hanshin Kobe earthquake. You are not very efficient. And then the Homeland Security people, in particular the natural disaster people, became very strong inside the Kantei. And I think it's now maybe one of the most efficient disaster relief group on Earth. Mm-hmm. Even French said it, that's wow, it's great. And the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami was a big shock again. It's far bigger than Kobe, and tsunami was a big one. And then it was strengthened again. Against terrorism, that's fine. But against the war, I have to say the government has not yet experienced anything. And preparation is a very low level. And the Army, Navy, Air Force are okay, they will fight. Foreign minister will jump around to get information. And police will be crazy to catch these spies. But other ministries like finance, METI, telecommunications, local governments, transportation, infrastructure, and they were, after the war, completely cut off the military affairs by GHQ. And we have to bring them back one by one. And now the biggest change is the finance ministry for the first time thought this is their job. 43 trillion yen, it's astronomical amount of money. And the defense ministry can't earn this, even though they fight seriously against the defense finance ministry. But it's the finance ministry is moving ahead simply because this is Abe-san started. This is what Abe-san started together with Aso-san. Aso-san left the government. He's now deputy chief of LDP. And Suzuki-san, the minister, is from his faction, Aso's faction, and brother-in-law of Aso-san. They are still implementing Abe's agenda in Kishida government. And Kishida-san is happy to pursue this agenda. That's the reason why the huge change of military budget is not possible. And METI is now changing too, slowly, but they're changing. They were good at the arms control after 1985 Toshiba Mechanics exportation of screws to Russian submarines. They were almost destroyed. And then the arms control is good vis-a-vis North Korea, Russia, and China, but there's no policy to enhance Japanese defense capabilities by their industrial policy. They have none. Now they are talking about they have to secure semiconductors somehow. They're borrowing a huge amount of money. They invite TSMC from Taiwan. And this is the first time that the METI is now implementing industrial national security policy. They are changing. So this national security world is now re-invading again other agencies. This is what's going on. But can we fight the Taiwan war? My instinct obliges me to say, no, we can't do it. Coordination is still very weak. Unlike the institution's constitution for earthquake, for tsunami, for nuclear disaster, we are very tight. Because of our failures, we're very tight. War, contingency, it's very weak because it's not yet tested by fire. People do understand by theory, but never practiced it, And I believe that we have to do this. But for this, we need a strong political leadership. And it's not yet done.
Thank you for that thought. Yes, I think my question was like 4 questions in one package. So sorry about that. This may have to be the last question. I have 2 more in the docket, but hopefully, maybe I'll give it to you. There are 2 very different questions, but I trust in your ability to address one, since you just did my 4 question in one package. First question is in regards to a Marine Force presence in Okinawa. Do you expect that the government will continue to remain committed to the current plan of relocation of Futenma and the basically whole restructuring of the Marine that was agreed under the Defense Policy Review Initiative back in the 2004-2005 period? And the second.
I do.
Okay, that was an easy one. So second question is on the North Korea. So if North Korea becomes fully capable to launch ICBMs from submarine, then both Japan and South Korea are A, they're both exposed, and then B, they may not have, neither of us have the effective means deter that and especially from preventing North Korea mistakenly shoot something which could land on Japanese territory. How do you see this recent missile development pace, that the progress that North Korea seemed to be making, and what can Japan do about it beyond what we are already discussing? Or do you think the current approach that Japanese government is taking, including acquiring, offensive capability, is the right mix to go?
Well, the North Korea is now acquiring seriously the nuclear weapons. They want to make them operational. And they want to be a nuclear power. 1, 2, do we engage North Koreans again? For tit and tat, we don't do that. Simply because they buy time, they sit together for 2-3 years and they say, President, you have elections. They get something and they go home. And they restart this with the new president. We can't do this simply because they have nuclear weapons. Iranians don't have nuclear weapons. So we offer talks with them. It's very difficult counterparts in negotiations, but we have rights to negotiate with them because they have not yet had nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. So our first reaction is drop the gun. Drop the gun, then I will talk to you. But the North Korea will never do this. But we cannot accept that we do negotiate with nuclear power status North Korea. We don't do that. That means without negotiations, they continue to, they fully will. They continue to expand their nuclear arsenal. This is what's going on for some time. 1. 2, Japan-US alliances. When Japan joined the NPT in the early 2070s, discussions like this: never have nuclear weapons. US can give Japan the robust nuclear umbrella. So that was the deal. We believe in it. And if North Koreans and Chinese develop huge number of nuclear weapons, and if our nuclear umbrella given by the Americans becomes a thin or even broken, we ask Americans, what should you do for this? We have a right to raise this question to the Americans. And we have to do that now. And Americans are now talking about rehabilitating ground-based tactical nuclear weapons and intermediate missiles. Biden just scrapped the sea-based intermediate nuclear missiles. I think it's a big mistake, but he did. Unfortunately, Japan said nothing to it. Japan should say, because it's not Americans, it's Japan who could be shot in the first place. So now we have to think about how to deter Chinese and Koreans and Russians from attacking us with nuclear weapons. The strategic nuclear weapons, nobody will shoot this because this is the end of the humanity, the whole. But tactical nukes, small ones, half size of a Hiroshima bomb, can be used very easily. If that is used, or if that is threatened to be used by China or North Korea, what shall we respond? I called Biden. No, this is not enough for Mr. Kishida. He should be prepared to say, if they shoot, we will shoot back. Americans will do that, make sure. If it is the case of small nuclear weapons, tactical, would Americans say, we're not do that? We're going to save your face and do the same blow to them with the nuclear weapons. They'll never do that. They will not do this. Americans would avoid at any cost total nuclear war. Very careful to climb the nuclear ladder. If the small sized nuclear weapons, tactical ones, could be used by the Chinese side, Americans will not use the tactical nuclear weapons. And that would shake very much the credibility of American nuclear umbrella in Japan. So how to assure Japanese is one aspect. How to make China fear is one aspect. But how to make Japanese people assured is quite another. We have to work on these 2 fronts. And we're not yet very much successful. Now everybody is talking about nuclear weapons in Japan. Not Kishida-san, but everybody is now talking about nuclear umbrella. And many say we are not assured. And this is the atmosphere in Tokyo.
Well, thank you very much for that thought. And I very much appreciate, again, staying up so late for your time in between. I know you have a teaching obligations and everything else. So very much grateful for your time this evening.
I'm sorry.
Next time, we hope to, I hope to do this, carry this, continue this conversation in DC.
Happy
So,
to.
all right.
Listen,
Thank
my
you.
best today, my friends. Okay.
Yes, I will. So this will
Thank you.
conclude this year's annual Voices from Japan webinar. And thank you very much for joining wherever you are joined. For those of you who are in the daylight time still, enjoy the rest of the day. And for those of you who are joining us from Asia or wherever it's in the evening, enjoy the rest of your evening. This concludes the webinar. Thank you so much for joining.